Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estáis? Soy Plácido Doménech. Gracias por acompañarme, gracias por estar ahí. Hoy tenemos un nuevo programa en xHUB.AI. Vamos a tener dos hoy, un Inside X y un debate AI, xDebate.AI, analizando ese documento que apareció creo que ayer sobre el Winning the Race Americans AI Action Plan, el plan que tiene América con la inteligencia artificial. Veremos y analizaremos cuál es, qué es lo que dicen, en qué papel nos dejan a Europa, a España, al resto del mundo, a China. Bueno, no lo estoy leyendo, lo estoy preparando. Van a venir invitados también de lujo, habituales, gente que vuelve de vacaciones. Así que bueno, a las 7:30, no sé si empalmaremos, porque son las 5. Bueno, la verdad es que tengo que deciros que, bueno, el programa de hoy es un Inside X que, bueno, en principio no iba a hacerlo por la duración de la entrevista. Intento que los Inside X sean de 30 a 45 minutos las charlas, sean más cortas. Esta es de 1 hora y media, creo. Pero bueno, me la habéis pedido. Hay gente que está acostumbrándose a ver algunas charlas a través de xHUB.AI con los Inside X y en mi compañía. Así que esta es muy top. No la he visto, solo he visto un par de fragmentos y me parece que es muy, muy top las cosas que plantean. Los medievos van a sufrir. Veo cada cosa en LinkedIn y en redes sociales apoyándose los medievos en conceptos y dogmas que realmente me tiene anodadado. Anodadado. Es un poco, no traumático, sino que cuando lo veo pienso que nos vamos a divertir. Y pienso que muchas cosas que decimos desde que xHUB era xHUB, pero bueno, ya de mucho antes, marcarán, como dijo un veterano de xHUB.AI, formaremos parte de la historia en ese sentido. No sé si tanto, pero esa va a ser nuestra lucha. Formar parte de la historia y escribirla. Ese es nuestro propósito con todo el tema de xHUB.AI. No simplemente decir que, bueno, es que la inteligencia artificial, bueno, va a tener que esperar al humano. Es que me descojono, vamos. Bueno, no vamos a entrar ahí porque además ya me han comentado que la charla de inversión racional, mi round 2, sale esta semana que viene, no la siguiente. Con lo que me voy a reservar para cuando salga esa charla y la podáis disfrutar. Tanto esa como la que saldrá en septiembre. Dos charlas que ya se han grabado, que yo creo que os van a encantar y va a dar mucho que hablar. Y va a hacer patalear mucho a los medievos. Pero nosotros no vivimos de que pataleen los medievos o que griten los monos, sino de crear y caminar en ese futuro que yo estoy convencido de mis Hassabis hablará mucho sobre ello, ¿no? O sea, vamos a ver. He acusado muchas veces a Demis Hassabis de una falta de liderazgo, no técnico, evidentemente, sino quizá de civilizatorio o de ser más ambicioso a la hora de mejorar y cambiar el mundo, pero es verdad que al final es un investigador. Vamos a ver qué dice aquí, con alguien tan bueno como Lex Fridman entrevistándolo. Ya tenéis aquí, ya en el chat está entrando gente. Bueno, vamos, pues justamente eso, analizar ese round 2 de Demis Hassabis. Y el título es Una nueva era en inteligencia artificial, futuro de la inteligencia artificial, simulación de la realidad, física y videojuegos. Entiendo que van a hablar de todo, entiendo que hablarán también de ajedrez, como no. Ya al final los personajes y las preguntas y lo que dicen se suele repetir. Merienda virtual, a ver, por el chat aquí comentáis, merienda virtual, a ver qué nos dices hoy, qué nos cuentas hoy. Me voy a atragantar con la magdalena, con el cafelito y la magdalena. A ver, bueno, esto es un ritmo salvaje, la verdad. Empiezo a necesitar un respiro, pero por otro lado no me lo puedo permitir porque es como Al contrario, necesitaría clonarme y multiplicarme. Pero bueno, vamos a intentar ir al grano, porque si no se empalma un programa con el otro. Y aún tengo que preparar algo del otro programa, así que vamos a hacerlo rápido. Dirige y presenta, como siempre, vuestro amigo Plácido Doménech, un programa de la comunidad de Inteligencia Artificial y Ciencias Transversales de habla hispana, xHUB.AI, quinta temporada, non-stop, ni en verano, ni en invierno, ni en vacaciones, ni en navidades, nunca. Bueno, hemos parado algunas veces, ¿no? Y hemos descansado también. Pero es verdad que el ritmo ha sido siempre frenético y bueno, también vuestro apoyo ha sido incondicional. Gracias por estar ahí, gracias por vuestro apoyo, como digo. Este programa está transmitiéndose por X, YouTube, LinkedIn, Rumble, Kik y Twitch. Sabéis que Meta, ni Instagram ni Facebook ya transmitimos porque el señor Zuckerberg no estamos muy alineados a sus valores. Si os gusta el contenido, poner me gusta, compartir, comentad, suscribíos en YouTube, en las plataformas de podcast. Además, ya las plataformas de podcast antes habían contenidos de pago, pero ahora todos son gratuitos porque al final no merecía la pena. Estamos viendo a ver cómo monetizamos el canal para poder reinvertirlo, mejorar todo lo que hacemos para que nos compense, porque es muchísimo trabajo. Si queréis uniros a la comunidad Discord, que estoy muy contento de cómo ha funcionado, me pedís a través de un correo, un mensaje directo, el enlace. Os paso el enlace y estáis dentro y ahí tenéis contenido, noticias, papers, cursos, todo gratuito. Y la comunidad, una comunidad de calidad como es xHUB.AI, hablando, debatiendo, etcétera. Estoy pensando, lo hubiera hecho hoy, seguramente sí que lo hagamos, no lo sé. Abrir en Reddit, también el tema de Reddit, ¿de acuerdo? Y si queréis apoyarnos económicamente, podéis hacerlo a través de Buy Me a Coffee, o podéis hacerlo a través de PayPal en esa dirección, o podéis hacerlo también a través de Superchat en YouTube. Y vamos a por la charla, porque es una charla larga, intensa. Estoy seguro que también pondré bastantes comentarios, con lo que entonces vamos a por ella. Vamos a por ella. Vamos a por ella. Un segundo. No la tenía preparada. Vale, ya la tenemos aquí. Recordaos el canal del ex Fridman. Vamos a por ella.
It's hard for us humans to make any kind of clean predictions about highly nonlinear dynamical systems. But again, to your point, we might be very surprised what classical learning systems might be able to do about even fluid.
Yes, exactly. I mean, fluid dynamics, Navier-Stokes equations, these are traditionally thought of as very, very difficult, intractable problems to do on classical systems. They take enormous amounts of compute, weather prediction systems, these kind of things all involve fluid dynamics calculations. But again, if you look at something like VO, our video generation model, it can model liquids quite well, surprisingly well, and materials, specular lighting. I love the ones where, there's people who generate videos where there's like clear liquids going through hydraulic presses and then being squeezed out. I used to write physics engines and graphics engines in my early days in gaming, and I know it's just so painstakingly hard to build programs that can do that, and yet somehow these systems are reverse engineering from just watching YouTube videos. So presumably what's happening is it's extracting some underlying structure around how these materials behave. So perhaps there is some kind of lower dimensional manifold that can be learned if we actually fully understood what's going on under the hood. That's maybe true of most of reality.
The following is a conversation with Demis Hassabis, his second time on the podcast. He is the leader of Google DeepMind and is now a Nobel Prize winner. Demis is one of the most brilliant and fascinating minds in the world today, working on understanding and building intelligence, and exploring the big mysteries of our universe. This was truly an honor and a pleasure for me. This is the Lex Fridman podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description and consider subscribing to this channel. And now, dear friends, Here's Demis, Hassabis. In your Nobel Prize lecture, you propose what I think is a super interesting conjecture that, quote, any pattern that can be generated or found in nature can be efficiently discovered and modeled by a classical learning algorithm. What kind of patterns or systems might be included in that? Biology, chemistry, physics, maybe cosmology, neuroscience? What are we talking about?
Sure. Well, look, I felt that it's sort of a tradition, I think, of Nobel Prize lectures that you're supposed to be a little bit provocative, and I wanted to follow that tradition. What I was talking about there is if you take a step back and you look at all the work that we've done, especially with the AlphaX projects, so I'm thinking AlphaGo, of course, AlphaFold, what they really are is we're building models of very combinatorially high dimensional spaces that, you know, if you try to brute force a solution, find the best move and go, or find the exact shape of a protein, and if you enumerated all the possibilities, there wouldn't be enough time in the you know, the time of the universe. So you have to do something much smarter. And what we did in both cases was build models of those environments, and that guided the search in a smart way, and that makes it tractable. So if you think about protein folding, which is obviously a natural system, you know, why should that be possible? How does physics do that? You know, proteins fold in milliseconds in our bodies. So somehow physics solves this problem that we've now also solved computationally. And I think the reason that's possible is that in nature, natural systems have structure, because they were subject to evolutionary processes that shape them. And if that's true, then you can maybe learn what that structure is.
So this perspective, I think, is a really interesting one. You've hinted at it, which is almost like crudely stated. Anything that can be evolved can be efficiently modeled. Think there's some truth to that?
Yeah, I sometimes call it survival of the stablest or something like that, because you know, it's of course there's evolution for life, living things, but there's also, you know, if you think about geological time, so the shape of mountains, that's been shaped by weathering processes, right, over thousands of years. But then you can even take it cosmological, the orbits of planets, the shapes of asteroids. These have all been survived kind of processes that have acted on them many, many times. So if that's true, then there should be some sort of pattern that you can kind of reverse learn, and a kind of manifold really that helps you search to the right solution, to the right shape, and actually allow you to predict things about it in an efficient way, because it's not a random pattern. Right, so it may not be possible for man-made things or abstract things like factorizing large numbers, because unless there's patterns in the number space, which there might be, but if there's not and it's uniform, then there's no pattern to learn. There's no model to learn that will help you search. So you have to do brute force. So in that case, you maybe need a quantum computer, something like this. But in most things in nature that we're interested in are not like that. They have structure that evolved for a reason and survived over time. And if that's true, I think that's potentially learnable by a neural network.
It's like nature's doing a search process, and it's so fascinating that it's...
Una afirmación, un razonamiento que es muy disruptivo y que nos tiene que hacer reflexionar sobre la naturaleza de la inteligencia artificial. Si un sistema tiene una estructura o un proceso subyacente, una geometría, unas reglas, un patrón, a través de la inteligencia artificial, a través de esta tecnología, vamos a poder inferir ese comportamiento. Hace también esa insinuación, ¿no? Si evoluciona, se puede modelizar. ¿Cómo modelizamos ese comportamiento, esos cambios, ¿no? Y en definitiva, el análisis de esos procesos a través de aprendizaje inverso nos llevan a obtener respuestas a través de esta tecnología de inteligencia artificial más allá de las capacidades humanas. Y esto nos aleja del debate medieval de muchos. Entonces, primero tenemos que entender esto, de lo que Demis Hassabis creo que sabe un rato, y luego podemos aterrizarlo en diferentes soluciones e intentar ver qué ocurre. No al revés, que es lo que hace mucha gente, ¿no? Hablar de algo desde su perspectiva y no desde lo que es realmente. Y eso es un grave error, pero bueno, divertido.
In that search process is creating systems that can be efficiently modeled.
That's right. Yeah.
So interesting.
So they can be efficiently rediscovered or recovered because nature's not random, right? Everything that we see around us, including like the elements that are more stable, all of those things, they're subject to some kind of selection process, pressure.
Do you think, because you're also a fan of theoretical computer science and complexity?
Dice, la naturaleza no es aleatoria. Nosotros estamos sometidos a un proceso de selección, una programación, llamémosla de la realidad, de la simulación divina, trascendente, que ejecuta todo esto. Y hay una selección que está por encima nuestra. Es la propia de la simulación, pero en la que nosotros intervenimos y de la que formamos parte y en la que podemos influir también.
Do you think we can come up with a kind of complexity class, like a complexity zoo type of class, where maybe it's the set of learnable systems, the set of learnable natural systems, LNS?
Yeah.
This is a Demis Hassabis new class of systems that could be actually learnable by classical systems in this kind of way, natural systems that can be modeled efficiently.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been fascinated by the P equals MP question and what is modelable by classical systems, i.e. non-quantum systems, Turing machines in effect. And that's exactly what I'm working on actually in kind of my few moments of spare time with a few colleagues about should there be, maybe a new class of problem that is solvable by this type of neural network process and kind of mapped onto these natural systems. So, the things that exist in physics and have structure. So I think that could be a very interesting new way of thinking about it. And it sort of fits with the way I think about physics in general, which is that, I think information is primary. Information is the most sort of fundamental unit of the universe. More fundamental.
La información es el tipo de unidad fundamental del universo. ¿Lo tenemos claro o no? Información cuántica. ¿Pero lo tenemos claro o no? ¿Qué es el fundamental? Es como lo hemos hablado mucho, ¿no? El bit, la propuesta, no me acuerdo quién la dijo sobre lo del bit reality, ¿no? La realidad como bit de información, ¿no? Como un grid, pero bueno, lo que se sabe es que no son bits, sino que son qubits, ¿no? Información cuántica. Aquí Demis Hassabis vuelve a confirmarlo y aseverarlo y entenderlo, cosa que a muchos les cuesta.
Mental than energy and matter. I think they can all be converted into each other, but I think of the universe as a kind of informational system.
So when you think of the universe as an informational system, then the P equals MP question is a physics question.
That's right.
And it's a question that can help us actually solve the entirety of this whole thing going on.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most fundamental questions, actually, if you think of physics as informational. And the answer to that, I think, is going to be, very enlightening.
More specific to the P and NP question, this, again, some of the stuff we're saying is kind of crazy right now. Just like the Christian Edmondson Nobel Prize speech controversial thing that he said sounded crazy, and then you went and got a Nobel Prize for this with John Jumper, solved the problem. So let me just stick to the P equals NP. Do you think there's something in this thing we're talking about that could be shown if you can do something like polynomial time or constant time compute ahead of time and construct this gigantic model, then you can solve some of these extremely difficult problems in a theoretical computer science kind of way?
Yeah, I think that there are actually a huge class of problems that could be couched in this way, the way we did AlphaGo and the way we did AlphaFold, where, you model what the dynamics of the system is, the properties of that system, the environment that you're trying to understand, and then that makes the search for the solution or the prediction of the next step efficient. Basically polynomial time, so tractable by a classical system, which a neural network is. It runs on normal computers, right? Classical computers, Turing machines in effect. And I think it's one of the most interesting questions there is how far can that paradigm go? I think we've proven, and the AI community in general, that classical systems, Turing machines, can go a lot further than we previously thought. They can do things like model the structures of proteins and play Go to better than world champion level. And, a lot of people would have thought maybe 10, 20 years ago that was decades away, or maybe you would need some sort of quantum machines to quantum systems to be able to do things like protein folding. And so I think we haven't really even sort of scratched the surface yet of what classical systems, so-called, could do. And of course, AGI being built on a neural network system on top of a neural network system on top of a classical computer would be the ultimate expression of that. And I think the limit, what the bounds of that kind of system, what it can do, it's a very interesting question, and directly speaks to the P equals MP question.
What do you think, again, hypothetical, might be outside of this? Maybe emergent phenomena? Like if you look at cellular automata, you have extremely simple systems and then some complexity emerges.
Yes.
Maybe that would be outside, or even, would you guess even that might be amenable to efficient modeling by a classical machine?
Yeah, I think those systems would be right on the boundary, right? So I think most emergent systems, cellular automata, things like that, could be modelable by a classical system. You just sort of do a forward simulation of it and it'd probably be efficient enough. Of course, there's the question of things like chaotic systems where the initial conditions really matter and then you get to some, uncorrelated end state. Now, those could be difficult to model. So I think these are kind of the open questions. But I think when you step back and look at what we've done with the systems and the problems that we've solved, and then you look at things like VO3 on like video generation, sort of rendering physics and lighting and things like that, really core fundamental things in physics. It's pretty interesting. I think it's telling us something quite fundamental about how the universe is structured, in my opinion. So, in a way, that's what I want to build AGI for, is to help us as scientists answer these questions like P equals MP.
Yeah, I think we might be continuing.
Dice que están construyendo una AGI para poder ayudarles a cuestiones como que P es igual a NP. Lo tenemos claro, ¿no? Cañero el inicio de Demis Hassabis.
Surprised about what is modelable by classical computers. I mean, AlphaFold 3 on the interaction side is surprising that you can make any kind of progress on that direction. Alpha Genome is surprising that you can map the genetic code to the function. Kind of playing with the emergent kind of phenomena. You think there's so many combinatorial options and then here you go. You can find the kernel that is efficiently modeled.
Yes, because there's some structure, there's some landscape, in the energy landscape or whatever it is that you can follow, some gradient you can follow. And of course, what neural networks are very good at is following gradients. And so if there's one to follow and you can specify the objective function correctly, you don't have to deal with all that complexity, which I think is how we maybe have naively thought about it for decades, those problems. If you just enumerate all the possibilities, it looks totally intractable. And there's many, many problems like that. And then you think, well, it's like 10 to the 300 possible protein structures, 10 to the 170 possible Go positions. All of these are way more than atoms in the universe. So how could one possibly find the right solution or predict the next step? But it turns out that it is possible. And of course, reality in nature does do it, right? Proteins do fold. So that gives you confidence that there must be, if we understood how physics was doing that, in a sense, and we could mimic that process, i.e. model that process, it should be possible on our classical systems is basically what the conjecture is about.
And of course, there's nonlinear dynamical systems, highly nonlinear dynamical systems, everything involving fluid.
Yes, right.
I recently had a conversation with Terence Tao, who mathematically it contends with a very difficult aspect of systems that have some singularities in them that break the mathematics. And it's just hard for us humans to make any kind of clean predictions about highly nonlinear dynamical systems. But again, To your point, we might be very surprised what classical learning systems might be able to do about even fluid.
Yes, exactly. I mean, fluid dynamics, Navier-Stokes equations, these are traditionally thought of as very, very difficult, intractable kind of problems to do on classical systems. They take enormous amounts of compute, weather prediction systems, these kind of things all involve fluid dynamics calculations. And, but again, if you look at something like VO, our video generation model, it can model liquids quite well, surprisingly well, and materials, specular lighting. I love the ones where, there's people who generate videos where there's like clear liquids going through hydraulic presses and then being squeezed out. I used to write physics engines and graphics engines in my early days in gaming, and I know it's just so painstakingly hard to build programs that can do that. And yet somehow these systems are, reverse engineering from just watching YouTube videos. So presumably what's happening is it's extracting some underlying structure around how these materials behave. So perhaps there is some kind of lower dimensional manifold that can be learned if we actually fully understood what's going on under the hood. That's maybe true of most of reality.
Yeah, I've been continuously...
Muy importante esto, ¿no? Es decir, viendo VO3, al final te das cuenta que ha inferido a través de ingeniería inversa una estructura de información, unas reglas, una geometría, una información, en definitiva, subyacente, ¿no? Que hace que interprete el mundo pues, a través de vídeos, como estamos viendo, ¿no? De forma hiperrealista. Lo que quiere decir que ha entendido un comportamiento subyacente y lo sabe interpretar en una animación, en un vídeo, etc. ¿no? Es sorprendente.
Precisely by this aspect of VO3, I think a lot of people highlight different aspects, including the comedic and the meme and all that kind of stuff. And then the ultra realistic ability to capture humans in a really nice way that's compelling and feels close to reality, and then combine that with native audio. All of those are marvelous things about VO3, but exactly the thing you're mentioning, which is the physics.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. And then the really interesting scientific question is, what is it understanding about our world in order to be able to do that? Because of the cynical take with the diffusion models, there's no way it understands anything. But it seems, I don't think you can generate that kind of video without understanding. And then our own philosophical notion of what it means to understand then is like brought to the surface. Like, to what degree do you think VO3 understands our world?
I think to the extent that it can predict the next frames, in a coherent way, that is a form, of understanding, right? Not in the anthropomorphic version of, it's not some kind of deep philosophical understanding of what's going on. I don't think these systems have that, but they certainly have modeled enough of the dynamics, put it that way, that they can pretty accurately generate whatever it is, 8 seconds of consistent video that by eye, at least, at a glance, is quite hard to distinguish what the issues are. And imagine that in 2 or 3 more years' time. That's the thing I'm thinking about, and how incredible they will look, given where we've come from, the early versions of that 1 or 2 years ago. And so the rate of progress is incredible. And I think I'm like you, is like a lot of people love all of the stand-up comedians, and the actually captures a lot of human dynamics very well, and body language. But actually the thing I'm most impressed with and fascinated by is the physics behavior, the lighting and materials and liquids, and it's pretty amazing that it can do that. And I think that shows that it has some notion of at least intuitive physics, right? How things are supposed to work intuitively, maybe the way that a human child would understand physics, right? As opposed to a PhD student really being able to unpack all the equations. It's more of an intuitive physics understanding.
Well, that intuitive physics understanding, that's the base layer. That's the thing people sometimes call like common sense. Like it really understands something. I think that really surprised a lot of people. It blows my mind that I just didn't think it would be possible to generate that level of realism without understanding. There's this notion that you can only understand the physical world by having an embodied AI system, a robot that interacts with that world. That's the only way to construct an understanding of that world.
Yeah.
But VO3 is directly challenging that,
right.
It feels like.
Yes. And it's very interesting, even if you were to ask me 5-10 years ago, I would have said, even though I was immersed in all of this, I would have said, well, yeah, you probably need to understand intuitive physics. Like if I push this off the table, this glass, it will maybe shatter, and the liquid will spill out, right? So we know all of these things. But I thought that, and there's a lot of theories in neuroscience, it's called action in perception, where, you need to act in the world to really, truly perceive it in a deep way. And there was a lot of theories about you'd need embodied intelligence or robotics or something, or maybe at least simulated action, so that you would understand things like intuitive physics. But it seems like you can understand it through passive observation, which is pretty surprising to me. And again, I think hints at something underlying about the nature of reality, in my opinion, beyond just the cool videos that it generates. And of course, there's next stages is maybe even making those videos interactive, so one can actually step into them and move around them, which would be really mind blowing, especially given my games background. So you can imagine, and then I think we're starting to get towards what I would call a world model, a model of how the world works, the mechanics of the world, the physics of the world, and the things in that world. And of course, that's what you would need for a true AGI system.
I have to talk to you about video games. So
Yes.
you were being a bit trolly. I think you're having more and more fun on Twitter, on X, which is great to see. So a guy named Jimmy Apples tweeted, "Let me play a video game of my VO3 videos already. Google cooked so good. Playable world models when," spelled WEN ? And then you quote tweeted that with, "Now wouldn't that be something?" So how hard is it to build game worlds with AI? Maybe can you look out into the future of video games 5-10 years out? What do you think that looks like?
Well, games were my first love, really, and doing AI for games was the first thing I did professionally in my teenage years, and was the first major AI systems that I built. And I always want to scratch that itch one day and come back to that. So, and I will do, I think. And I think I'd sort of dream about, what would I have done back in the 90s if I'd had access to the kind of AI systems we have today? And I think you could build absolutely mind-blowing games. And I think the next stage is, I always used to love making, all the games I've made are open world games. So they're games where there's a simulation, and then there's AI characters, and then the player interacts with that simulation, and the simulation adapts to the way the player plays. And I always thought they were the coolest games because so games like Theme Park that I worked on, where everybody's game experience would be unique to them, right? Because you're kind of co-creating the game, right? We set up the parameters, we set up initial conditions, and then you as the player are immersed in it, and then you are co-creating it with the simulation. But
Theme Park, este es un juego que creó Demis Hassabis. Para quien no lo haya jugado, era una auténtica locura.
Of course, it's very hard to program open world games. You've got to be able to create content whichever direction the player goes in, and you want it to be compelling no matter what the player chooses. And so it was always quite difficult to build things like cellular automata, actually, type of those kind of classical systems which created some emergent behavior. But they're always a little bit fragile, a little bit limited. Now we're maybe on the cusp in the next few years, 5-10 years, of having AI systems that can truly create around your imagination, can sort of dynamically change the story and storytell the narrative around, and make it dramatic no matter what you end up choosing. So it's like the ultimate choose your own adventure sort of game. And I think maybe we're within reach if you think of a kind of interactive version of VO, and then wind that forward 5 to 10 years and imagine how good it's going to be.
Yeah, so you said a lot of super interesting stuff there. So one, the open world, built into that is a deep personalization, the way you've described it. So it's not just that it's open world, like you can open any door and there'll be something there. It's that the choice of which door you open in an unconstrained way defines the worlds you see. So some games try to do that. They give you choice.
Yes.
But it's really just an illusion of choice, because you only like Stanley Parable, this game I recently played. It's really, there's a couple of doors and it really just takes you down the narrative. Stanley Parable is a great video game. I recommend people play that kind of in a meta way mocks the illusion of choice, and there's philosophical notions of free will and so on. But I do like, one of my favorite games of Elder Scrolls is Daggerfall, I believe. that they really played with a like random generation of the dungeons.
Yeah.
Of if you can step in and they give you this feeling of an open world. And there, you mentioned interactivity. You don't need to interact. That's a first step because you don't need to interact that much. You just, when you open the door, whatever you see is randomly generated for you.
Yeah.
And that's already an incredible experience because you might be the only person to ever see that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but what you'd like is a little bit better than just sort of a random generation, right? So you'd like, and also better than a simple A/B hard-coded choice, right? That's not really open world, right? As you say, it's just giving you the illusion of choice. What you want to be able to do is potentially anything in that game environment, and I think the only way you can do that is to have generated systems that will generate that on the fly. Of course, you can't create infinite amounts of game assets, right? It's expensive enough already how AAA games are made today. And that was obvious to us back in the 90s when I was working on all these games. I think maybe Black and White was the game that I worked on, early stages of that had still probably the best AI, learning AI in it. It was an early reinforcement learning system that you were looking after this mythical creature and growing it and nurturing it. And depending how you treated it, it would treat the villagers in that world in the same way. So if you were mean to it, it would be mean. If you were good, it would be protective. And so it was really a reflection of the way you played it. So actually all of the, I've been working on sort of simulations and AI through the medium of games at the beginning of my career. And really the whole of what I do today is still a follow-on from those early, more hard-coded ways of doing the AI to now, fully general learning systems that are trying to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, it's been interesting, hilarious, and fun to watch you and Elon obviously itching to create games because you're both gamers. And one of the sad aspects of your incredible success in so many domains of science, like serious adult stuff,
Yeah.
that you might not have time to really create a game. You might end up creating the tooling that others would create the game, and you have to watch
exactly.
others create the thing you've always dreamed of. Do you think it's possible you can somehow, in your extremely busy schedule, actually find time to create something like Black and White, an actual video game where like you could make the childhood dream become reality?
There's two things ways to think about that. Is maybe that with vibe coding, as it gets better, there's a possibility
Yes.
that I could,
Sure.
one could do that actually in your spare time. So I'm quite excited about that as that would be my project if I got the time to do some vibe coding. I'm actually itching to do that. And then the other thing is, maybe it's a sabbatical after AGI has been safely stewarded into the world and delivered into the world. That, and then working on my physics theory, as we talked about at the beginning, those would be the two my two post AGI projects. Let's call it that way.
I would love to see which
the ultimate game
post AGI which you choose, solving the problem that some of the smartest people in human history contended with, so P equals NP, or creating a cool video.
Yeah, well, but in my world they'd be related because it would be an open world simulated game, as realistic as possible. So what is the universe? That's speaking to the same question, right? And P equals NP. I think all these things are related, at least in my mind.
I mean, in a really serious way, it's like video games sometimes are looked down upon. It's just this fun side activity, but especially as AI does more and more of the difficult, boring tasks, something we in modern world call work. Video games is the thing in which we may find meaning, in which we may find like what to do with our time.
Bueno, menuda frase. Es decir, que los videojuegos es el último resquicio donde encontraríamos propósito una vez que las IAs hicieran todas las tareas. Pero bueno, vamos a ver, el ex Fridman también es lo que es lo que es. Es que dibujan una humanidad. Fijaos qué humanidad. No, al final lo que queremos es no trabajar para acabar jugando a videojuegos como... Vamos, a mí me encantan los videojuegos, pero es lo que defienden, vamos.
You could create incredibly rich, meaningful experiences. Like that's what human life is. And then in video games, you can create more sophisticated, more diverse ways of living.
Yeah.
Right? That's
I think so.
idea.
I mean, those of us who love games, and I still do, it's almost can let your imagination run wild, right? Like I used to love games and working on games so much because it's the fusion, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, the sort of golden era, and maybe the 80s of the games industry, and it was all being discovered. New genres were being discovered. We weren't just making games; we felt we were creating a new entertainment medium that never existed before. Right? Especially with these open world games and simulation games, where you as the player were co-creating the story. There's no other media. Entertainment media where you do that, where you as the audience actually co-create the story. And of course now with multiplayer games as well, it can be a very social activity and can explore all kinds of interesting worlds in that. But on the other hand, it's very important to also enjoy and experience the physical world. But the question is then, I think we're going to have to kind of confront the question again of what is the fundamental nature of reality? What is going to be the difference between these increasingly realistic simulations and multiplayer ones and emergent and what we do in the real world?
Yeah, there's
¿Cuál es el propósito, en definitiva? Exacto. Si vas a crear una simulación dentro de una simulación, dentro de una simulación, lo que estás haciendo, con perdón, es el gilipollas. Lo que debes preguntarte es pararte, estés en la simulación el nivel que sea, y decir, ¿cuál es mi propósito? Totalmente de acuerdo con Fridman. Si no comentase en qué, pues nos quedamos igual. Entiendo que es en un momento de la conversación, pero si lo puedes poner, porque no voy viendo el chat en tiempo real. Vale.
clearly a huge amount of value to experiencing the real world, nature. There's also a huge amount of value in experiencing other humans directly in person, the way we're sitting here today.
Yes.
But we need to really scientifically, rigorously answer the question, why?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
which aspect of that can be mapped
Yeah.
into the virtual world.
Exactly.
So it's not enough to say, yeah, you should go touch grass and hang out in nature. It's like, why exactly is that valuable?
Yes. And I guess that's maybe the thing that's been haunting me, obsessing me from the beginning of my career. If you think about all the different things I've done, they're all related in that way. This simulation, nature of reality, and what is the bounds of, what can be modeled.
Sorry for the ridiculous question, but so far, what is the greatest video game of all time? What's up there?
Well, my favorite one of all time is Civilization. I have to say that was the Civilization 1 and Civilization 2, my favorite games of all time.
I can only assume you've avoided the most recent one because it would probably that would be your sabbatical. You would disappear.
Yes, exactly. They take a lot of time, these Civilization games, so I've got to be careful with them.
Fun question. You and Elon seem to be somehow solid gamers. Is there a connection between being great at gaming and being great leaders of AI companies?
I don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, we both love games, and it's interesting. He wrote games as well to start off with. It's probably, especially in the era I grew up in, where home computers just became a thing, in the late 80s and 90s, especially in the UK. I had a Spectrum and then a Commodore Amiga 500, which was my favorite computer ever. And that's why I learned all my programming. And of course, it's a very fun thing to program games. So I think it's a great way to learn programming, probably still is. And then of course I immediately took it in directions of AI and simulations, so I was able to express my interest in games and my sort of wider scientific interests all together. And then the final thing I think that's great about games is it fuses artistic design, art with the most cutting edge programming. So again, in the 90s, all of the most interesting technical advances were happening in gaming, whether that was AI, graphics, physics engines, hardware, even GPUs, of course, were designed for gaming originally. So everything that was pushing computing forward in the 90s was due to gaming. So interestingly, that was where the forefront of research was going on. And it was this incredible fusion with art, graphics, but also music, and just the whole new media of storytelling. And I love that. For me, it's this sort of multidisciplinary kind of effort is, again, something I've enjoyed my whole life.
I have to ask you, I almost forgot about one of the many, and I would say one of the most incredible things recently that somehow didn't yet get enough attention is AlphaEvolve. We talked about evolution a little bit, but it's the Google DeepMind system that evolves algorithms.
Yeah.
Are these kinds of evolution-like techniques promising as a component of future superintelligent systems? So for people who don't know, it's kind of, I don't know if it's fair to say it's LLM-guided evolution search.
Yeah.
So evolutionary algorithms are doing the search,
Yes.
and LLMs are telling you where.
Yes, exactly. So LLMs are kind of proposing some possible solutions, and then you use evolutionary computing on top to find some novel part of the search space. So actually, I think it's an example of very promising directions where you combine LLMs or foundation models with other computational techniques. Evolutionary methods is one, but you could also imagine Monte Carlo tree search, basically many types of search algorithms or reasoning algorithms sort of on top of or using the foundation models as a basis. So I actually think there's quite a lot of interesting things to be discovered probably with these sort of hybrid systems, let's call them.
But not to romanticize evolution.
Yeah.
I'm only human. But you think there's some value in whatever that mechanism is? Because we already talked about natural systems. Do you think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit of us understanding, being able to model, being able to simulate evolution, and then using that, whatever we understand about that nature-inspired mechanism to then do search better and better and better?
Yes. So if you think about, again, breaking down the sort of systems we've built to their really fundamental core, you've got like the model of the underlying dynamics of the system. And then if you want to discover something new, something novel that hasn't been seen before, then you need some kind of search process on top to take you to a novel region of the search space. And you can do that in a number of ways. Evolutionary computing is one. With AlphaGo, we just use Monte Carlo tree search, right? And that's what found Move 37, the new kind of never seen before strategy in Go. And so that's how you can go beyond potentially what is already known. So the model can model everything that you currently know about, right? All the data that you currently have. But then how do you go beyond that? So that starts to speak about the ideas of creativity. How can these systems create something new, discover something new? Obviously, this is super relevant for scientific discovery or pushing science and medicine forward, which we want to do with these systems. And you can actually bolt on some fairly simple search systems on top of these models and get you into a new region of space. Of course, you also have to make sure that you're not searching that space totally randomly. It would be too big. So you have to have some objective function that you're trying to optimize and hill climb towards, and that guides that search.
But there's some mechanism of evolution that are interesting, maybe in the space of programs, but then the space of programs is an extremely important space because you can probably generalize to everything. But, for example, mutation. So it's not just Monte Carlo tree search where it's like a search. You could every once in a while
combine things,
alter like components of a thing.
Yes.
So then, what evolution is really good at is not just the natural selection, it's combining things and building increasingly complex hierarchical systems.
Yes.
So that component is super interesting, especially like with AlphaEvolve in the space of programs.
Yeah, exactly. So you can get a bit of an extra property out of evolutionary systems, which is some new emergent capability may come about.
Yes.
Right, of course, like happened with life. Interestingly, with naive sort of traditional evolutionary computing methods without LLMs.
La vida una propiedad emergente, anda, Demis. Vete a fumar otra cosa.
The modern AI, the problem with them, they were very well studied in the 90s and early 2000s and some promising results. But the problem was they could never work out how to evolve new properties, new emergent properties. You always had a sort of subset of the properties that you put into the system. But maybe if we combine them with these foundation models, perhaps we can overcome that limitation. Obviously, natural evolution clearly did, because it did evolve new capabilities, right? So bacteria to where we are now. So clearly that it must be possible with evolutionary systems to generate new patterns, going back to the first thing we talked about, and new capabilities and emergent properties. And maybe we're on the cusp of discovering how to do that.
Yeah, listen, AlphaEvolve is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I've on my desk at home, most of my time is spent behind that computer is just programming, and next to the three screens is a skull of a Tiktaalik, which is one of the early organisms that crawled out of the water onto land. And I just kind of watch that little guy. It's like whatever the computation mechanism of evolution is quite incredible.
Yes.
It's truly, truly incredible.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's exactly the thing we need to do our search, but never dismiss the power of nature, what it did here.
Yeah. And it's amazing, which is a relatively simple algorithm, right, effectively, and it can generate all of this immense complexity. It emerges, obviously running over, 4 billion years of time, but it's you can think about that as, again, a search process that ran over the physics substrate of the universe for a long amount of computational time, but then it generated all this incredible rich diversity.
So,
vamos a ver qué comentáis aquí. Dice, cuando me refiero que estoy total... Dice el titorro youtubero. Menudo nombre de perfil, ¿eh? Cuando me refiero que estoy totalmente de acuerdo con Fridman es que quizás uno de nuestros propósitos, además de consumir series, películas, etcétera, cuando la IA lo haga todo, es el de jugar videojuegos. Sí, son propósitos muy elevados. Sí. Javier Ernesto, Luján Prieto. Creo que ya se pueden correr modelos alternativos. Veo 3 en local con xHUB.AI. Sí, hay un montón de modelos. Local, en cloud, gratis, open source, propietarios. Hay de todo.
So many questions I want to ask you. So one, you do have a dream. One of the natural systems you want to try to model is a cell.
Yes.
That's a beautiful dream. I could ask you about that. I also, just for that purpose, on the AI scientist front, just broadly. So there's a essay from Daniel Kokotayo, Scott Alexander, and others that outlines steps along the way to get to ASI, and has a lot of interesting ideas in it. One of which is including a superhuman coder and a superhuman AI researcher. And in that, there's a term of research taste that's really interesting. So in everything you've seen, do you think it's possible for AI systems to have research taste, to help you in the way that AI co-scientist does, to help steer human brilliant scientists, and then potentially by itself to figure out what are the directions where you want to generate truly novel ideas? Because that seems to be like a really important component of how to do great science.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the hardest things to mimic or model is this idea of taste or judgment. I think that's what separates the great scientists from the good scientists. Like all professional scientists are good technically, right? Otherwise they wouldn't have made it that far in academia and things like that. But then, do you have the taste to sort of sniff out what the right direction is, what the right experiment is, what the right question is? So it's picking the right question is the hardest part of science, and making the right hypothesis. And that's what today's systems definitely they can't do. So I often say it's harder to come up with a conjecture, a really good conjecture, than it is to solve it. So we may have systems soon that can solve pretty hard conjectures. Maths Olympiad problems, where we Alpha Proof last year, our system got silver medal in that. Really hard problems. Maybe eventually we'll better solve a Millennium Prize kind of problem. But could a system have come up with a conjecture worthy of study that someone like Terence Tao would have gone, you know what, that's a really deep question about the nature of maths or the nature of numbers or the nature of physics? And that is far harder type of creativity. And we don't really know. Today's systems clearly can't do that. And we're not quite sure what that mechanism would be, this kind of leap of imagination like Einstein had when he came up with special relativity and then general relativity with the knowledge he had at the time.
As for conjecture, you want to come up with a thing that's interesting, it's amenable to proof.
Yes.
So like it's easy to come up with a thing that's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
It's easy to come up with a thing that's extremely easy, but at that very edge,
that sweet spot, right, of basically advancing the science and splitting the hypothesis space into two, ideally, right? Whether if it's true or not true, you've learned something really useful, and and that's hard, and making something that's also falsifiable and within sort of the technologies that you currently have available. So it's a very creative process, actually, highly creative process that I think just a kind of naive search on top of a model won't be enough for that.
Okay, the idea of splitting the hypothesis space in two is super interesting. So I've heard you say that there's basically no failure or failure is extremely valuable if it's done, if you construct the questions right, if you construct the experiments right, if you design them right, that failure or success are both useful. So
Yes.
perhaps because it splits the hypothesis space in two, it's like a binary search.
That's right. So when you do real blue sky research, there's no such thing as failure, really, as long as you're picking experiments and hypotheses that meaningfully split the hypothesis space. So, and you can learn something kind of equally valuable from an experiment that doesn't work. That should tell you, if you've designed an experiment well and your hypotheses are interesting, it should tell you a lot about where to go next. And then you're effectively doing a search process and using that information in very helpful ways.
So to go to your dream of modeling a cell, what are the big challenges that lay ahead for us to make that happen? We should maybe highlight that AlphaFold. I mean, there's just so many leaps.
Yeah.
So AlphaFold solved, if it's fair to say, protein folding, and there's so many incredible things we could talk about there, including the open sourcing, everything you've released. AlphaFold 3 is doing protein, RNA, DNA interactions, which is super complicated and fascinating. That's amenable to modeling. AlphaGenome predicts how small genetic changes, like if we think about single mutations, how they link to actual function. So it seems like it's creeping along to sophisticated, to much more complicated things like a cell, but a cell has a lot of really complicated components.
Yeah. So what I've tried to do throughout my career is I have these really grand dreams, and then I try to, as you've noticed, and then I try to break them down. It's easy to have a kind of crazy ambitious dream, but the trick is, how do you break it down into manageable, achievable interim steps that are meaningful and useful in their own right? And so virtual cell, which is what I call the project of modeling a cell, I've had this idea, of wanting to do that for maybe more like 25 years. And I used to talk with Paul Nurse, who is a bit of a mentor of mine in biology. He runs founded the Crick Institute and won the Nobel Prize in 2001. We've been talking about it since before in the 90s, and I used to come back to it every 5 years. It's like, what would you need to model the full internals of a cell so that you could do experiments on the virtual cell, and what those experiments in silico, and those predictions would be useful for you to save you a lot of time in the wet lab, right? That would be the dream. Maybe you could 100x speed up experiments by doing most of it in silico, the search in silico, and then you do the validation step in the wet lab. That's the dream. And so but maybe now, finally, so I was trying to build these components, AlphaFold being one, that would allow you eventually to model the full interaction, a full simulation of a cell. And I'd probably start with a yeast cell, and partly that's what Paul Nurse studied, because the yeast cell is like a full organism that's a single cell, right? So it's the kind of simplest single cell organism. And so it's not just a cell, it's a full organism. And yeast is very well understood, and so that would be a good candidate for a kind of full simulated model. Now, AlphaFold is the solution to the kind of static picture of what does a protein look, 3D structure of protein look like, a static picture of it. But we know that biology, all the interesting things happen with the dynamics, the interactions, and that's what AlphaFold 3 is the first step towards, is modeling those interactions. So first of all, pairwise, proteins with proteins, proteins with RNA and DNA, but then the next step after that would be modeling maybe a whole pathway, maybe like the TOR pathway that's involved in cancer or something like this. And then eventually you might be able to model, a whole cell.
Also, there's another complexity here, that stuff in a cell happens at different time scales. Is that tricky? It's like protein folding is, super fast.
Yes.
I I don't know all the biological mechanisms,
Yeah.
but some of them take a long time.
Yeah.
And so that's a level. So the levels of interaction has a different temporal scale that you have to be able to model.
So that would be hard. So you'd probably need several simulated systems that can interact at these different temporal dynamics, or at least maybe it's like a hierarchical system. So you can jump up and down the different temporal stages.
So can you avoid, I mean, one of the challenges here is not avoid simulating, for example, the quantum mechanical aspects of any of this, right? You want to not over model. You can skip ahead to just model the really high level things that get you a really good estimate of what's going to happen.
So you got to make a decision when you're modeling any natural system. What is the cutoff level of the granularity that you're going to model it to, that then it captures the dynamics that you're interested in? So probably for a cell, I would hope that would be the protein level. And that one wouldn't have to go down to the atomic level. So, you know, and of course, that's where AlphaEvolve kicks in. So that would be kind of the basis. And then you'd build these higher level simulations that take those as building blocks. And then you get the emergent behavior.
Apologize for the pothead questions ahead of time, but do you think we'll be able to simulate and model the origin of life? So being able to simulate the first from non-living organisms, the birth of a living organism.
I think that's one of the deepest and most fascinating questions. I love that area of biology. You know, there's a great book by Nick Lane, one of the top experts in this area, called the 10 Great Inventions of Evolution. I think it's fantastic, and it also speaks to what the great filters might be, you know, prior, or are they ahead of us? I think they're most likely in the past, if you read that book, of how unlikely to go, you know, have any life at all, and then single cell to multi-cell seems an unbelievably big jump that took like 1 billion years, I think, on Earth to do, right? So it shows you how hard it was, right?
Bacteria were super happy for a very long
time before they captured mitochondria somehow, right? I don't see why AI couldn't help with that. Some kind of simulation. It's a bit of a search process through a combinatorial space. Here's like all the chemical soup that you start with, the primordial soup that, you know, maybe was on Earth near these hot vents. Here's some initial conditions. Can you generate something that looks like a cell? So perhaps that would be a next stage after the virtual cell project is, well, how could you actually something like that emerge from the chemical soup?
Well, I would love it if there was a move 37 for the origin of life.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the sort of great mysteries. I think ultimately what we will figure out is their continuum. There's no such thing as a line between non-living and living. But if we can make that rigorous, that the very thing from the Big Bang to today has been the same process. If we can break down that wall that we've constructed in our minds of the actual origin of from non-living to living, and it's not a line, that it's a continuum that connects physics and chemistry and biology. There's no line.
I mean, this is my whole reason why I worked on AI and AGI my whole life, because I think it can be the ultimate tool to help us answer these kind of questions. And I don't really understand why, you know, the average person doesn't worry about this stuff more. Like how can we not have a good definition of life and not living and non-living, and the nature of time, and let alone consciousness and gravity and all these things. It's just, and quantum mechanics weirdness. It's just, to me, I've always had this sort of screaming at me in my face. It's getting louder. You know, it's like, what is going on here? You know, and I mean that in the deeper sense, like in the, you know, the nature of reality, which has to be the ultimate question that would answer all of these things. It's sort of crazy if you think about it. We can stare at each other and all these living things all the time. We can inspect it with microscopes and take it apart almost down to the atomic level, and yet we still can't answer that clearly in a simple way, that question of how do you define living. It's kind of amazing.
Bueno, y no dicen, habla de la naturaleza de la realidad, pero no habla de ella y de lo que se sabe. Quizás si metiera esa incógnita o ese conocimiento, obtendría respuestas, por ejemplo, en algunas de ellas reflexionadas como duda, pero otras avanzadas, como en ese programa de conciencia cuántica. Evidentemente no sabemos qué es lo que hace que algo esté vivo a que no esté vivo. Nuestro amigo Fridman dice que es un movimiento 37, como si fuera una jugada de decisión arbitraria o inteligente o dentro de una búsqueda, como si fuera una búsqueda de Monte Carlo, y eso es la vida, ¿sabes? De verdad que... bueno, seguimos.
Yeah. Living, you can kind of talk your way out of thinking about, but like consciousness, like we have this very obviously subjective conscious experience, like we're at the center of our own world and it feels like something. And then how are you not screaming at the mystery of it all?
Right.
We haven't, I mean, but really humans have been contending with the mystery of the world around them for a long, there's a lot of mysteries. Like what's up with the sun and the rain?
Yeah.
Like what's that about? And then like last year we had a lot of rain and this year we don't have rain. Like what did we do wrong? Humans have been asking that question for a long time.
Exactly. So I guess we've developed a lot of mechanisms to cope with this, these deep mysteries that we can see, but we can't fully understand, and we have to just get on with daily life. And we keep ourselves busy, right? In a way, did we keep ourselves distracted?
I mean, weather is one of the most important questions of human history. We still, that's the go-to small talk direction of the weather,
especially in England.
And then which is, famously is an extremely difficult system to model. And even that system, the Google DeepMind has made progress on.
Yes, we've created the best weather prediction systems in the world, and they're better than traditional fluid dynamics sort of systems that usually calculated on massive supercomputers, takes days to calculate it. We've managed to model a lot of the weather dynamics with neural network systems, with our WeatherNext system. And again, it's interesting that those kinds of dynamics can be modeled, even though they're very complicated, almost bordering on chaotic systems in some cases. A lot of the interesting aspects of that can be modeled by these neural network systems, including very recently we had, cyclone prediction of where, paths of hurricanes might go. Of course, super useful, super important for the world. And it's super important to do that very timely and very quickly, and as well as accurately. And I think it's a very promising direction, again, of, simulating and so that you can run forward predictions and simulations of very complicated real world systems.
I should mention that I've gotten a chance in Texas to meet a community of folks called the Storm Chasers.
Yes.
And what's really incredible about them, I need to talk to them more, is they're extremely tech savvy, because what they have to do is they have to use models to predict where the storm is. So it's this beautiful mix of like crazy enough to like go into the eye of the storm and like, in order to protect your life and predict where the extreme events are going to be, they have to have increasingly sophisticated models of weather.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful balance of like being in it as living organisms and the cutting edge of science. So they actually might be using DeepMind systems. So that's
they are. Hopefully they are, and I'd love to join them on one of those chasers. They look amazing, right? To actually experience it one time.
Exactly, and then also to experience the correct prediction of where something will come and how it's going to evolve. It's incredible.
Yeah,
you've estimated that we'll have AGI by 2030. So there's interesting questions around that. How will we actually know that we got there? And what may be the move 37 of AGI?
My estimate is sort of 50% chance in the next 5 years. So, by 2030, let's say. And so I think there's a good chance that could happen. Part of it is what is your definition of AGI? Of course, people are arguing about that now, and mine's quite a high bar and always has been, of like, can we match the cognitive functions that the brain has, right? So we know our brains are pretty much general Turing machines, approximate, and of course we've created incredible modern civilization with our minds. So that also speaks to how general the brain is, and for us to know we have a true AGI, we would have to like make sure that it has all those capabilities. It isn't kind of a jagged intelligence where some things it's really good at, like today's systems, but other things it's really flawed at. And that's what we currently have with today's systems. They're not consistent. So you'd want that consistency of intelligence across the board. And then we have some missing, I think, capabilities, like sort of the true invention capabilities and creativity that we were talking about earlier. So you'd want to see those. How you test that? I think you just test it. One way to do it it would be kind of brute force test of tens of thousands of cognitive tasks that we know that humans can do, and maybe also make the system available to a few hundred of the world's top experts, the Terence Taos of each subject area, and see if they can find, give them a month or two and see if they can find an obvious flaw in the system. And if they can't, then I think you're pretty, you can be pretty confident we have a fully general system.
Maybe to push back a little bit, it seems like humans are really incredible.
Allí en el 2030, y un poco ha dado pistas, ¿no? Que lo van a poner en manos de expertos para evaluarlo, cuáles son las características que debe tener, todas las capacidades cognitivas. Bueno, 2030. Esos son 5 años. ¿Nos vamos posicionando ya o los medievos? No, pero el ser humano va a otro ritmo. Tengo una mala noticia y es que vamos hasta ver media horita más.
As the intelligence improves across all domains, to take it for granted, like you mentioned, Terence Tao, these brilliant experts, they might quickly, in a span of weeks, take for granted all the incredible things it can do and then focus in, right there. I consider myself, first of all, human.
Yeah.
Second, I identify as human. Some people listen to me talk and they're like, that guy is not good at talking, the stuttering, so like even humans have obvious across domains limits, even just outside of mathematics and physics and so on. I wonder if it will take something like a Move 37, so on the positive side, versus like a barrage of 10,000 cognitive tasks where it would be one or two where it's like,
yes,
holy shit, this
so
is
I think
special.
Exactly. So I think there's the sort of blanket testing to just make sure you've got the consistency, but I think there are the sort of lighthouse moments like the Move 37 that I would be looking for. So one would be inventing a new conjecture or a new hypothesis about physics like Einstein did. So maybe you could even run the back test of that very rigorously, like have a cutoff of 1900 and then give the system everything that was written up to 1900 and then see if it could come up with special relativity and general relativity, right? Like Einstein did. That would be an interesting test. Another one would be, can it invent a game like Go? Not just come up with Move 37, a new strategy, but can it invent a game that's as deep, as aesthetically beautiful, as elegant as Go? And those are the sorts of things I would be looking out for, and probably a system being able to do several of those things, right, for it to be very general, not just one domain. And so I think that would be the signs, at least that I would be looking for, that we've got a system that's AGI level. And then maybe to fill that out, you would also check their consistency, make sure there's no holes in that system either.
Yeah, something like a new conjecture.
Lo que has dicho es muy interesante, ¿no? Es decir, fijaos, pruebas para lo que sería una AGI. Decirle que estás en 1900 y ver si puedes razonar hasta el punto de ser como Einstein y llegar a la teoría de la relatividad general. Es una buena prueba, ¿eh? Es una buena prueba. Luego, si puede crear un juego como Go, ¿no? Con reglas propias y que no tenga deficiencias o huecos o inconsistencias, ¿no? Eso me parece muy interesante. Y evidentemente no solo a través de un dominio, como puede ser matemáticas, programación, sino un cross-domain, ¿no? Me parece cosas nuevas, muy interesantes dentro de esta charla.
Or scientific discovery. That would be a cool feeling.
Yeah. That would be amazing. So it's not just helping us do that, but actually coming up with something brand new.
And you would be in the room for that. And so
Ideally.
it would be like probably 2 or 3 months before announcing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you would just be sitting there trying not to tweet.
Something like that. Exactly. It's like, what is this amazing new, physics idea? And then we would probably check it with world experts in that domain, right? And validate it and kind of go through its workings. And I guess it would be explaining its workings too. Be an amazing moment.
Do you worry that we, as humans, even expert humans like you, might miss it?
it may be pretty complicated. So it could be, the analogy I give there is, I don't think it will be totally mysterious to the best human scientists, but it may be a bit like, for example, in chess, if I was to talk to Gary Kasparov or Magnus Carlsen and play a game with them and they make a brilliant move, I might not be able to come up with that move, but they could explain why afterwards that move made sense, and we would be able to understand it to some degree. Not to the level they do, but if they were good at explaining, which is actually part of intelligence too, is being able to explain in a simple way that what you're thinking about. I think that would be very possible for the best human scientists.
But I wonder, maybe you can educate me on the side of Go. I wonder if there's moves from Magnus or Gary where they at first will dismiss it as a bad move.
Yeah, sure, there could be. But then afterwards, they'll figure out with their intuition that why this works, and then empirically, the nice thing about games is, one of the great things about games is it's a sort of scientific test. Do you win the game or not win? And then that tells you, okay, that move in the end was good. That strategy was good, and then you can go back and analyze that and explain even to yourself a little bit more why, explore around it, and that's how chess analysis and things like that work. So perhaps that's why my brain works like that, because I've been doing that since I was 4, and you're trained, it's sort of hardcore training in that way.
But even now, like when I generate code, there is this kind of nuanced, fascinating contention that's happening, where I might at first identify as a set of generated code as incorrect in some interesting nuanced ways. But then I'm always have to ask the question, is there a deeper insight here that I'm the one who's incorrect?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to, as the systems get more and more intelligent, you're going to have to contend with that. It's like, what do you, is this a bug or a feature of what you just came up with?
Yeah, and they're going to be pretty complicated to do, but of course it will be, you can imagine also AI systems that are producing that code or whatever that is, and then human programmers looking at it, but also not unaided with the help of AI tools as well. So it's going to be kind of an interesting, maybe different AI tools to the ones that they're more, kind of monitoring tools to the ones that generated it.
So if we look at an AGI system, sorry to bring it back up, but AlphaEvolve, super cool. So AlphaEvolve enables, on the programming side, something like recursive self-improvement, potentially. Like what, if you can imagine what that AGI system, maybe not the first version, but a few versions beyond that, what does that actually look like? Do you think it will be simple? Do you think it will be something like a self-improving program and a simple one?
I mean, potentially that's possible, I would say. I'm not sure it's even desirable, because that's a kind of like hard takeoff scenario.
Yeah.
But you these current systems like AlphaEvolve, they have, human in the loop deciding on various things. They're separate hybrid systems that interact. One could imagine eventually doing that end to end. I don't see why that wouldn't be possible. But right now, I think the systems are not good enough to do that in terms of coming up with the architecture of the code. And again, it's a little bit connected to this idea of coming up with a new conjectural hypothesis. How they're good if you give them very specific instructions about what you're trying to do. But if you give them a very vague, high-level instruction, that wouldn't work currently. And I think that's related to this idea of invent a game as good as Go. Right? Imagine that was the prompt. That's pretty underspecified. And so the current systems wouldn't know, I think, what to do with that, how to narrow that down to something tractable. And I think there's similar, look, just make a better version of yourself. That's too unconstrained. But we've done it in as you know, with AlphaEvolve, things like faster matrix multiplication. Mm-hmm. So when you hone it down to a very specific thing you want, it's very good at incrementally improving that. But at the moment, these are more like incremental improvements, sort of small iterations. Whereas if you wanted a big leap in understanding, you need a much larger advance.
Yeah, but it could also be, sort of to push back against hard takeoff scenario, it could be just a sequence of incremental improvements, like matrix multiplication. Like it has to sit there for days thinking how to incrementally improve a thing, and that it does so recursively. And as you do more and more improvement, it'll slow down.
Right.
So there'll be the path to AGI won't be it'll be a gradual improvement over time.
Yes. if it was just incremental improvements, that's how it would look. So the question is, could it come up with a new leap, like the Transformers architecture?
Yeah.
Right? Could it have done that back in 2017 when we did it and Brain did it? And it's not clear that these systems, something like AlphaEvolve, wouldn't be able to make such a big leap. So for sure, these systems are good. We have systems, I think, that can do incremental hill climbing, and that's a kind of bigger question about, is that all that's needed from here, or do we actually need one or two more big breakthroughs?
And can the same kind of systems provide the breakthroughs also? So make it a bunch of S-curves, like incremental improvement, but also every once in a while leaps.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has systems that can have shown unequivocally those big leaps. Right, we have a lot of systems that do the hill climbing of the S-curve that you're currently on.
Yeah, and that would be the Move 37 is a leap.
Yeah, I think would be a leap, something like that.
Do you think the scaling laws are holding strong on pre-training, post-training, test time, compute? Do you, on the flip side of that, anticipate AI progress hitting a wall?
We certainly feel there's a lot more room just in the scaling. So actually all steps, pre-training, post-training, and inference time. So there's sort of 3 scalings that are happening concurrently. And we, again, it's about how innovative you can be, and we pride ourselves on having the broadest and deepest research bench. We have amazing, incredible researchers and people like Noam Shazir, who came up with transformers, and Dave Silver, who led the AlphaGo project, and so on. And it's that research base means that if some new breakthrough is required, like an AlphaGo or transformers, I would back us to be the place that does that. So I'm actually quite like it when the terrain gets harder, right? Because then it veers more from just engineering to true research, and or research plus engineering, and that's our sweet spot. And I think that's harder. It's harder to invent things than to fast follow. And so we don't know. I would say it's kind of 50-50 whether new things are needed or whether the scaling the existing stuff is going to be enough. And so in true kind of empirical fashion, we're pushing both of those as hard as possible. The new blue sky ideas, and maybe about half our resources are on that, and then scaling to the max the current capabilities. And we're still seeing some fantastic progress on each different version of Gemini.
That's interesting the way you put it in terms of the deep bench, that if progress towards AGI is more than just scaling compute, so the engineering side of the problem, and is more on the scientific side where there's breakthroughs needed, then you feel confident DeepMind as well. Google DeepMind is well positioned to
Yes.
kick ass in that domain.
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of the last decade or 15 years, it's been, maybe, 80-90% of the breakthroughs that underpins modern AI field today was from, originally Google Brain, Google Research, and DeepMind. So, yeah, I would back that to continue, hopefully.
So on the data side, are you concerned about running out of high quality data, especially high quality human data?
I'm not very worried about that, partly because I think there's enough data, and it's been proven to get the systems to be pretty good. And this goes back to simulations again. Do you have enough data to make simulations, or so that you can create more synthetic data that are from the right distribution? Obviously, that's the key. So you need enough real world data in order to be able to create those kinds of data generators. And I think that we're at that step at the moment.
Yeah, you've done a lot of incredible stuff on the side of science and biology, doing a lot with not so much data.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a lot of data, but I guess enough take
Get
off.
that going. Exactly.
Yeah.
So exactly.
How crucial is the scaling of compute to building AGI? This is a question that's an engineering question. It's almost a geopolitical question, because it also integrated into that is the supply chains and energy, a thing that you care a lot about, which is potentially fusion.
Yes.
So innovating on the side of energy also. Do you think we're going to keep scaling compute?
I think so, for several reasons. I think compute, there's the amount of compute you have for training, often it needs to be co-located. So actually even like, bandwidth constraints between data centers can affect that. So there's additional constraints even there. And that's important for training, obviously, the largest models you can. But there's also, because now AI systems are in products and being used by billions of people around the world, you need a ton of inference compute now. And then on top of that, there's the thinking systems, the new paradigm of the last year, that where they get smarter the longer amount of inference time you give them at test time. So all of those things need a lot of compute, and I don't really see that slowing down. And as AI systems become better, they'll become more useful and there'll be more demand for them. So both from the training side actually is only just one part of that. It may even become the smaller part of what's needed in the overall compute that's required.
Yeah, that's one sort of almost meme-y kind of thing, which is like the success and the incredible aspects of VO3. There's people kind of make fun of, like, the more successful it becomes, the servers are sweating.
Yes, exactly.
to do the inference.
yeah, exactly. We did a little video of the servers frying eggs and things, and that's right. And we're going to have to figure out how to do that. There's a lot of interesting hardware innovations that we do. As you know, we have our own TPU line, and we're looking at like inference only chips, and how we can make those more efficient. We're also very interested in building AI systems, and we have done the help with energy usage. So help data center energy, like for the cooling systems, be efficient, grid optimization, and then eventually things like helping with plasma containment fusion reactors. We've done lots of work on that with Commonwealth Fusion, and also one could imagine reactor design, and then material design. I think is one of the most exciting new types of solar panel material. Room temperature superconductors has always been on my list of dream breakthroughs, and optimal batteries. And I think a solution to any one of those things would be absolutely revolutionary for climate and energy usage. And we're probably close, and again in the next 5 years, to having AI systems that can materially help with those problems.
If you were to bet, sorry for the ridiculous question,
Yeah.
but what is the main source of energy in like 20, 30, 40 years? Do you think it's going to be nuclear fusion?
I think fusion and solar are the two that I would bet on. Solar, I mean, it's the fusion reactor in the sky, of course. And I think really the problem there is batteries and transmission. So, as well as more and more efficient solar material, perhaps eventually, in space, these kind of Dyson sphere type ideas. And fusion, I think, is definitely doable, seems, if we have the right design of reactor and we can control the plasma and fast enough and so on. And I think both of those things will actually get solved. So we'll probably have at least, those are probably the two primary sources of renewable, clean, almost free, or perhaps free energy.
What a time to be alive. If I traveled into the future with you 100 years from now, how much would you be surprised if we've passed type 1 Kardashev scale civilization?
I would not be that surprised if there's a 100-year timescale from here. I mean, I think it's pretty clear if we crack the energy problems in one of the ways we've just discussed, fusion or very efficient solar, then if energy is kind of free and renewable and clean, then that solves a whole bunch of other problems. So, for example, the water access problem goes away because you can just use desalination. We have the technology, it's just too expensive. So only, fairly wealthy countries like Singapore and Israel and so on, like, actually use it. But if it was cheap, then all countries that have a coast could. But also you'd have unlimited rocket fuel. You could just separate seawater out into hydrogen and oxygen using energy, and that's rocket fuel. So combined with, Elon's amazing self-landing rockets, then it could be like sort of like a bus service to space. So that opens up, incredible new resources and domains. Asteroid mining, I think, will become a thing, and maximum human flourishing to the stars. Like, that's what I dream about as well, as like Carl Sagan's sort of idea of bringing consciousness to the universe, waking up the universe. And I think human civilization will do that in the full sense of time if we get AI right and crack some of these problems with it.
Yeah, I wonder what it would look like if you're just a tourist flying through space. You would probably notice Earth, because if you solve the energy problem, you would see a lot of space rockets probably. So it would be like traffic here in London, but in space.
Yes,
It's just a
exactly.
lot of rockets.
Yes.
And then you would probably see floating in space some kind of source of energy, like solar,
Yeah.
potentially. So Earth would just look more on the surface, more technological. And then you would use the power of that energy then to preserve the natural,
Yes.
like the rainforest and all that kind of
Exactly,
stuff.
because for the first time in human history, we wouldn't be resource constrained.
Mhm.
And I think that could be an amazing new era for humanity where it's not zero sum, right? I have this land, you don't have it. Or if we take, if the tigers have their forest, then the local villagers can't. What are they going to use? I think that this will help a lot. No, it won't solve all problems because there's still other human foibles that will still exist, but it will at least remove one of the big vectors, which is scarcity of resources, including land and more materials and energy. And we should be, I sometimes call it, and others call it, about this kind of radical abundance era where there's plenty of resources to go around. Of course, the next big question is making sure that that's fairly, shared fairly, and everyone in society benefits from that.
So there is some...
Pues amigos, lo vamos a dejar aquí. ¿Por qué? Porque mañana vamos a continuar. ¿Por qué? Bueno, voy a ver el chat, las cosas que me ponéis por el chat. Porque a las 7:30 tenemos debate. Y entonces no pasa nada que hagamos en 2 partes. Me parece una de las mejores charlas que he visto a Demis Hassabis y solo llevamos la mitad. Cosas súper interesantes sobre la AGI, sobre el tema energético que vamos a ver esta tarde con ese programa de América y Inteligencia Artificial para ganar la carrera. Entonces me parece súper interesante. No hay ya dudas de esta nueva era donde vamos a ver ese despegue. Yo creo que de donde estamos hasta 2030 va a haber una evolución desde agentes, AGIs, robótica, temas energéticos, progreso, cambios de sistemas, nueva economía. Todos estos cambios que estamos hablando y que los medievos dicen, no, porque el problema es el ser humano. Ya. Vamos a ver. Vosotros, Javier Ernesto, Luján, Prieto. Tú estás en Discord. ¿Estáis en Discord? Es que hacéis unas preguntas. ¿Has visto un paper? Pero si publicamos cientos de papers, es raro que sea un paper que no hayamos visto, pero vamos, y luego cualquier duda técnica a ese nivel de tokenización, por mensaje directo, en directo de YouTube, ni de coña. Entonces me envías el paper que es, me dices cuál es la duda o qué es lo que piensas y ya está. Pero sí, seguramente lo hayamos visto, ¿no? En temas de tokenización, pero toda esa información la publicamos en Discord, en una sección de investigación. Hay un tema de papers, de LLMs, de modelos multimodales, de razonamiento, bueno, de todo. Amigos, interesantísima charla. Y fijaos que incluso ideas de aquí voy a trasladarlas al debate de esta tarde. Esta tarde tenemos invitados y no puedo aplazar evidentemente el programa y hacer que este dure lo que dura. Es imposible, se me va a solapar una cosa con otra. Pensaba que era una hora y media de charla y es 2 horas y media. No pasa nada. Hemos visto la primera parte, mañana viernes la segunda parte. Espero que os haya gustado. Para mí yo creo que es una de las charlas del momento. Y bueno, la segunda parte que no tendremos mañana por la tarde, no habrá nada. Comentaremos de forma extendida, extensa, todo lo que se está diciendo porque es realmente antimedieval y en la línea que siempre he defendido y he comentado a través de xHUB.AI. Esperemos que sea cierto, yo sé que así lo va a ser. Va a superar evidentemente nuestras expectativas. Tenemos un gran reto delante de nosotros que es adaptarnos, transformarnos, crear una nueva versión de nosotros mismos y de la misma humanidad. No sé si vamos a ser capaces, sobre todo en Europa. Yo creo que tanto China como Estados Unidos lo tienen claro. Los que no lo tenemos claro somos los europeos y ya no te quiero contar España. Un país fallido para mí a día de hoy. Esta tarde sí que vamos a hablar de política, lo siento, y de geoestrategia y del plan de América con la inteligencia artificial. Nos vemos esta tarde a las 7:30 en un nuevo debate.